let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit in the left-hand pane here. We're going to find Site Recovery Infrastructure, and let's go ahead and click on that. Now, inside of here, we're going to see the site recovery infrastructure for each of the supported replication scenarios inside of Azure. So on the left here, we see 4 Azure virtual machines, VMware and physical machines for System Center VMM, and also Hyper-V sites at the bottom here. Now, let's walk through the site recovery infrastructure for each of these supported replication scenarios together. Now, underneath Azure virtual machines, we have network mapping, replication policies, and extension update settings. Let's go and walk through each one of these together. Now, under network mapping, we already have 2 network mappings defined. These network mappings came from our previous demonstration where we configured replication of that virtual machine from the central US region to the East US region. And so what that did is provided us a network mapping in each direction. And so that first line there, we see App Server VNet as the source network. That's the source network that our Windows virtual machine was created on. We see the source is going to be Central US, and then we have a target network of App Server VNet ASR, which is in the East US region. That target network, App Server VNet ASR, was created for us when we created the replication resources in that target region. And you see that suffix of -ASR. Now, the next line, we have the reciprocal defining from East US back to Central US. So there we see App Server VNet ASR in the East US region, and then the target network is App Server VNet in Central US. Now, underneath replication policies, we also have a replication policy defined. When we set up replication in the previous demonstration, we chose the default options for our replication policy. And so here we see a 24-hour retention policy. And so let's go and click on this to look at the details and the configuration of this particular replication policy. The first configuration that we have here is the recovery point retention in hours. And so this is how long it's going to keep recovery points online available for us inside of Azure. And that can be a value between 0 and 72. If you put our mouse over the tooltip here, we'll get some more detailed information about this particular configuration attribute. Now, for the next setting here, we have app consistent snapshot frequency in hours. And so this is how often an application consistent snapshot is taken. And this setting here by default sets us to every 4 hours. Now, remember, we do have crash consistent snapshots happening every 5 minutes. If we hit the drop down box here, we can see we have a setting of off all the way up to 12 hours. And so that's how frequently a application consistent snapshot will be taken. If we turn it off, no application consistent snapshots will be taken, but we still can rely on those crash consistent snapshots. So let's go ahead and close this out. And now let's head on down to extension update settings. So a pretty straightforward setting here. We have the setting to allow Site Recovery Service to manage the deployment of our virtual machine extension, or that Azure Site Recovery Mobility Service, into our Azure virtual machine. So here we can see we can turn that either off or on. Now let's move forward into the next replication scenario and look at the site recovery infrastructure required for VMware or physical machines. Now both of those share similar configurations, and so they're grouped together here in one site recovery setting infrastructure. And if we click on configuration servers, we have no configuration servers defined. And so if we wanted to, we can add a configuration server by clicking the plus sign up here to add a configuration server. Now, the first option that we have to choose is which type of server that we're going to be configuring, whether it's going to be VMware or physical. And so let's start off with the VMware scenario. Now, if I scroll down here, what you're going to get is a step-by-step process that describes how to deploy, configure, and register your configuration server. Defined in steps 1 and 2, describe how to download and deploy that OVF template on premises that gives you a virtual machine that's going to run the configuration server, the process server, and also that master target server. Steps 3 and 4 describe how you're going to connect to that virtual machine and also complete that installation by setting an administrator password. Step 5 there describes how you can launch the configuration wizard on that deployed virtual machine to register your on-premises configuration server with your Azure Site Recovery Services vault. So if we scroll up now and go to the top, that's for the VMware scenario. Let's go ahead and switch over to the physical server scenario and scroll this down a little bit here. This is going to describe the configuration to deploy your configuration server onto a physical system. And so step 1 there is going to tell you that you're going to need to run this on a pretty modern operating system, whether it's 2012 R2 or 2016. Step 2 is going to describe that you need to make sure that you either have proxy access or direct access to the service URLs in Azure. Those are the services inside of Azure that your on-premises infrastructure will need to be able to communicate to over the internet. Step 3 describes how you can download the Azure Site Recovery Unified Setup file. And then step 4 has what's called the Vault registration key. The vault registration key includes information such as the location of your recovery services vault and also the authentication information to authenticate your on-premises configuration server into your Azure Site Recovery Services vault. Now, steps 5 through 8 describe the process for installing the configuration and process servers, registering them with Azure Site Recovery, and also has a link to the documentation for any additional remaining tasks for setting up replication for virtual machines or physical machines. So let's go ahead and close this out here. And we also have the ability to set up replication policies. So let's go ahead and check that out. Now, we don't have any replication policies set for VMware or physical machines, but if we needed to, we can go ahead and define that here. So we'd give our policy a name. We can define the source type, which is going to be VMware or physical machines, and that's our only option to choose from there. Now, the target type is going to be Azure, and then we describe the RPO threshold in minutes. In this setting here, we have an RPO threshold in minutes set to 60. So if our continuous data replication from on-prem is falling behind this value, alerts can be generated telling us that we're outside of our RPO. Now, moving down a little bit, we have recovery point retention in hours. And so similar to the previous scenario, recovery point retention in hours is how long we're going to keep recovery points available inside of Azure. And we also have set an application consistent snapshot frequency of 1 hour. Again, the ability to turn that off or up to 12 hours are our options there. So let's go ahead and close out of here and head on over to the next configuration, which is going to be for System Center VMMs. So let's go ahead and click on VMM servers. And so we don't have any VMM servers defined, but I do want to show you the process to add a VMM server and also a Hyper-V host if needed to. And so in the Add Server wizard, if we scroll down a little bit, you'll see register your System Center VMM server on premises and the individual steps to do that. And so first up, you see check that the VMM server has at least one VMM cloud configured. We also want to ensure access to those service URLs in step 2. Step 3 gives us the ability to download the Azure Site Recovery Provider. That's the component that goes on the VMM server. Step 4 gives us the ability to download our vault registration key, which similar to the previous scenario has both the location of our Azure Site Recovery Services vault and the ability to authenticate to it. And then step 5 gives us a link to some more detailed information about the installation of the provider on the VMM server if we need some more advanced options. Scrolling down a little bit further, we see register your Hyper-V hosts. So that first part was the VMM server. Now this part is each individual host that you have on premises. And so walking through these steps, here you see step 1, you need to have 2012 R2 or better. Step 2 says we need to check that our Hyper-V host is assigned to an appropriate VMM cloud. Step 3, making sure that our Hyper-V host can access those service URLs so that it can communicate with Azure. Step 4 gives us a download to the Site Recovery Services agent, right? That's the component that goes on the individual host. And step 5 tells us to run the installer and also gives us a link to more detailed information about that installation process if we need it. All right, so let's go ahead and close out of here and head on over to our final replication scenario, and that's going to be Hyper-V sites. At the bottom here, we can see Hyper-V sites, Hyper-V hosts, and replication policies. And let's start off with Hyper-V sites. A Hyper-V site is a way for me to aggregate on-premises Hyper-V hosts into a single unit inside of Azure Site Recovery and apply policy to them. And let's go ahead and create our first Hyper-V site together. We'll click Add Hyper-V Site and give our Hyper-V site a name. And I'll go ahead and call that Hyper-V site. So let's go ahead and click OK to create that individual Hyper-V site. Now, for this demonstration, we're going to create this Hyper-V site now, and in a later demonstration in this module, we're going to register a host to this Hyper-V site. But just like we did for the other replication scenarios, I do want to walk you through the registration of adding a Hyper-V host right now. So if we click on Hyper-V hosts and go ahead and click Add Server, it'll describe the process just like the other replication scenarios and how we would go ahead and add a server to this particular Site Recovery Services vault. And so here we see register your Hyper-V hosts on premises. Step 1 tells us that we have to have a modern operating system of 2012 R2 or above. Step 2 tells us that we need to make sure that we either have proxy access or direct access to the Azure service URLs for Azure Site Recovery. Step 3 gives us the ability to download the installer for the Site Recovery Services provider. And I'm going to go ahead and click that link there to start the download of that installation file, which we're going to use in a subsequent demonstration. So back over here in the portal again, step 4 describes how we can download the vault registration key. And here we can see in that dropdown now, we have our Hyper-V site listed. And so I'm going to go ahead and click download to download the vault registration key. So contained inside that vault registration key is going to have my Hyper-V site information, my Azure Site Recovery Services vault information, and the authentication information for my Site Recovery Services vault. I'm going to take that and go to my Hyper-V host, install the provider, give it the vault registration key, and it's going to know which Azure Site Recovery Services vault and also which Hyper-V site it's a member of. And we'll do that together later in a demonstration in this module. So let's go and close out of here and head on back over to the Site Recovery Infrastructure overview. Now, the key takeaway for this module is Site Recovery Infrastructure is the core place that you're going to go to configure your Azure Site Recovery Services infrastructure.